One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. Jon Wilner of the Pac-12 Hotline is once again on One Question. Jon, Monday you published a piece, I call it the Wilner Manifesto. You called it Pac-12 Football in Need of Repair. Here's a Radical Solution. The core of your advice for the league was to create a new committee that really plays a large role in the governance of football. And you've talked so much for a number of weeks this season, but even going back into last season, about some scheduling tweaks that you would like to see the conference make that specifically would be better, A, for the student-athlete experience, B, could safeguard some of the more high-flying teams right now and put them in a better position for national contention towards the end of the year. Let's start there. We know, as we're talking right now, the 2018 Pac-12 conference schedule did just come out, so we'll get there. But let's start with your manifesto and walk me through maybe how you put this together in your mind, and then how you got it on paper. And for those who maybe didn't read the piece, even though we included it in D1 Ticker, let's provide context on what specifically you suggested.
Well, I'm honored to be attached to the word manifesto.
I think it's accurate. That's what you did here, manifesto.
I had been thinking about it for a while, and only recently had it kind of really coalesced in my head. Certainly the schedule problems that they've had this year played a large role in the whole thought process. There's a big difference between playing a tough schedule and being at a competitive disadvantage. And I see a lot of instances where Pac-12 teams have been at a competitive disadvantage this season, not only relative to the other teams in the Pac-12, but relative to the other teams in the country. I compared some of the instances to what the SEC and the Big Ten have, and the Pac-12 is the only conference that puts its schools in the position that it does, primarily playing a Friday night road game after a Saturday road game. So you're getting back to campus a lot of times, somewhere 10, 12 at night, 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and then you're turning around and you got to go play a Friday road game. The other big one to me is that they have several instances where a team plays a conference road game against a team that is coming off a bye and at home. That happened to Washington, or is happening to Washington, 3 times this year. No other team in the AP preseason poll had it more than once, and very few had it at all. So those were a couple instances of the what I would say is the competitive disadvantage, and the results have certainly borne out the fact that something's up, because the Friday night road teams are 0-4, and in 3 of those cases they were favored, and in a couple of cases they were substantial favorite. And from a probability standpoint, you would think that at least once one of the Friday road teams would have won, given that. So the schedule had a lot to do with it, but it's also other issues of what you could loosely call governance. I think that they need a governing body, full autonomy to make decisions, and it would be made up of a mix of athletic directors, football coaches, directors of football operations, because they know so much of the nuance of the day-to-day operation, and also faculty athletic reps, because you've got to have the academic side represented. So each school would have one representative. It'd be a rotating deal. That'd be 12 voters, and then I'd probably, Deputy Commissioner Jamie Zaninovich, who was very well regarded throughout the league, he'd be the chairman and would have voting privileges. So there'd be 13 people with votes, and they would oversee everything. Schedule, they'd oversee the conference schedule, of course. They'd oversee any instances of practice policy standardization, training method standardization, postseason contracts. There's plenty of stuff out there that the NCAA wouldn't necessarily have direct oversight on. There's leeway for the conferences, so to speak, within the NCAA manual, and that governing body, so to speak, would would be in charge.
So before we get to the schedule that was released this morning, and to be clear, they did not announce that they have this committee in place yet. But how would you?
If I suggested it, they won't do it. So,
how would you respond to the challenge? And I was interested in discussing this with you because of the depth of that you went to describe how this would work and why it would work, and not just this nebulous idea. I mean, you were pretty thorough on thinking this through of who would be involved and what type of issues they could address. And again, you've covered the actual results of questionable scheduling dynamics within the league very closely. How would you respond to the challenge of, John, they still got to play the games, and in order for the Pac-12 to consistently, let's use the word consistently, get a program in the college football playoff, they have to win the games. You have to win the games. Doesn't matter when they're scheduled, doesn't matter where they are, doesn't matter what you're coming off of. You have to win the games, and you're good enough to win the games or you're not. And I've heard that a little bit around the industry in counter to stuff you've written over the last couple of months.
Oh yeah, and I don't deny that at all. You got to be good enough to win, but at the same time, I don't feel like your conference should be putting you at a disadvantage, right? It's hard enough to get through 13-0, 12-1, and the Pac-12 has made the playoff 2 of the first 3 years. But I just don't think that the teams should have an additional challenge over and above winning the game of being placed at a competitive disadvantage, like USC playing a road game on a Saturday and then having to play in Pullman on a Friday night. Or Washington State, same thing, playing in Eugene, in an evening game in Eugene, getting back to campus, I don't know when it was, 1 a.m., then turning around and having to play in Berkeley on a Friday night. They don't need it's almost like a piling on situation, right? I mean, playing the games, winning the games is hard enough and should be the standard without what is almost an artificial hurdle thrown additionally. So I don't disagree with that at all. I just think the conference needs to not put its teams in egregious situations where they're at a competitive disadvantage. And the other thing is, it's not, my quote unquote manifesto. Again, it's not just about the schedule. I think the Pac-12 is in a unique situation relative to the other Power Fives, partly because of the time zones, partly because of it has staked out a different course on its media rights situation. It needs all the help it can get to stay competitive with the ACC, Big Ten, SEC in particular. So why not create a body that is solely dedicated to strategic thinking and trying to better the product? And that a lot of things are involved in there, including the schedule. But it's hard enough, I think, for the Pac-12 right now. And part of that is certainly the lack of exposure that happens with the Pac-12 networks. But there's plenty of other issues. And they should be as proactive as they can in trying to put out the best product as possible.
Is there any quality within some of the recommendations you made and what you're asking of teams that aren't perennial top tier programs within the league, and you're giving preference to the USCs of the world and the Washingtons of the world and potentially Washington State if they're projected to be a top 25 program, or can that be done in a really even fashion?
I think it can be done fairly even. If you eliminate the egregious situations for everybody, it's going to pretty much balance out. I mean, nobody should have to play a Friday night road game after a Saturday night road game, or a Saturday evening road game. That just, to me, that shouldn't happen to any of the schools, and primarily because it's not good for the student athletes. They have instances where teams play 3 night road games in a 4-week span. That happened to Washington State last year. They got back to campus at 4 a.m. 3 out of 4 nights in the month of October last year. Cal last year played a Friday night game and then played at USC on a Thursday night, and SC was coming off a bye. These are issues that don't happen in other conferences. The Pac-12 needs to be more proactive in assisting, not giving teams an advantage, but removing the disadvantages. And I think if they do that, it's fine. I don't know that they need to sit there and think, how can we best get USC into the college football playoff? Although you could also make a case that happens in, that's not the worst idea in the world either. I mean, the SEC is not going to put Alabama in a bad spot. Let's be honest. The Big Ten's not going to do that for Ohio State. So, I'm not sure treating everybody exactly equal is the smart thing if your goal is the playoff, but certainly you can't put anybody in a real bad spot.
Okay, so let's talk about what we've seen from the conference this morning. How do you think they've addressed some of the concerns that you've brought up over the last number of months?
Well, I mean, certainly I don't look at it like they're addressing my concerns, but the schedule that they released this morning for next year, of course, doesn't have any kickoff times, but it is much better. They did not. Everybody's got at least everybody's got a bye. USC didn't have a bye this year, which is partly because of the Notre Dame situation. It's a whole nother topic. But everybody's got a bye. There are no instances where the Friday road team, and there's 7 Friday road games. At in no instance does the road team have a road game the previous week. If you're playing on the road on Friday, you're either off the previous week or you're at home. So that is a big step in the right direction. I haven't had time to go through everybody's lineup for the whole season, but it certainly does seem to be a much more balanced schedule. No obvious signs of competitive disadvantage. Part of the reason for that it's so balanced is, believe it or not, it's as simple as Utah and BYU playing the last week of the regular season. BYU, they've got some flexibility as an independent. With them playing in what is week 13, that matches up with USC playing Notre Dame in week 13. So you got 2 teams playing non-conference games the last week of the season, which helps create balance for everybody else, not only that weekend, but throughout the schedule. But that tells you how tenuous the situation is, that one game, BYU-Utah, can have such an impact on the schedule for everybody. And to that end, they're still using the same process. They have not, the schedule is better, but it's still the same process. So we don't know what 2019 will bring or 2020, but for sure, next fall, it's a lot better.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.